Welcome to today's webinar, The Blueprint for Quality Documentation, Metrics to Build, Track and Measure. I am Sheba and I'll be a host for today's session. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Khyati Sharma Karki, technical writer at Intuit. She specializes in creating documentation that is simple, structured, and genuinely useful. She works closely with engineering and product teams to understand how systems function in practice, ensuring that documentation reflects real user experiences rather than assumptions. Today, she'll share how thoughtful documentation process practices go beyond writing words on a page. They help teams build shared understanding, improve collaboration, and create meaningful experiences for users. Through practical insights and real world examples, Kathy will explore how to measure the impact of documentation, align with engineering and product teams, and create resources that are clear, reliable, and valuable throughout the product journey. With that, I'll hand it over to Kathy. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Shiba. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, wherever you are joining from. My name is Khyati. Please feel free to ping your queries or thoughts in between the presentation. I'll start by introducing myself. I have 15 years of experience as a technical writer and as a communication expert. By communication expert, I mean I've tried my hands on e-learning videos, technical writing, all kinds of guides and all kinds of reference materials that available. I worked with SaaS products, so I have good knowledge on how the technology in SaaS world works. I worked with product companies, service companies, in fact, as an internal communication expert as well, where we talk about internal communications within the organization. So I've created all kinds of documentation or reference material or videos, e-learning videos, newsletters, everything. So in this presentation, I will share some insights that I have gathered over years that helped me create successful documentation. Within that documentation, I'll talk about different kinds of documentation, different kinds of technical writers or writers that are in demand, or how this field has expanded in the last few years. So we'll try and cover every aspect of writing when it comes to product industries, service industries, as well as any kind of other communication industries that we technical writers hired as, because there are multiple names that a technical writer has been known as. So let's start. My first agenda is I'll just walk you through what I prepared for you guys. So I know we all have gone through this phase where we finish documentation or project all exhausted, but it was never the writing that exhausts us. So we'll first talk about reframing why, you know, writing is not the hard part. Then we'll talk about learning the business landscape. Then I'll dive into, the right reviews, the right kind of reviews. We all get reviews, but what are the right kind of reviews that we should push for as technical writers? Then we'll talk about how to get the alignment from engineering or from the team that has raised the requirement for documentation. Then we talk about how to centralize that knowledge that we've created. Do we create a trusted source? Do we, use the already built repository that the organization has? Then we'll talk about the final word, which is like the final finish line, that what is it we need to publish and how do we publish that? And then we'll just get a bird's eye view on different kind of roles and different kind of industries for all the technical writers. So by the end of this presentation, my goal is that I'll give you some content that you can use in your everyday work and some of my insights. So let's start. So personally, I have not really struggled with the writing part. It is mostly the process, ownership, timing, and proving the impact of documentation that I experienced technical writers struggle with. They are trying to understand the process of whatever documentation they have to do, who are the owners, what are my timelines, what are the timings of the product release, and different, such factors. So these are our struggling points. If I resonate with you, please write so in the chat. Now, since these are the points we struggle with, process, ownership, timing, for proving impact, not the writing, why is it documentation sometimes failed? Not because writers are not skilled. Documentation fails when it's positioned on the left side of this table that you see. And I think almost everyone in this room has lived there at some point in time. So for me, documentation has failed when it was considered the last task. Let's say the product is complete, the application is complete, they're about to publish it. And towards the end, they say, okay, we also need some documentation, or they bring technical writers at the end, or they make it just one person's responsibility. Okay, so we've had a technical writer, this person needs to do everything. However, it isn't shared ownership. It is the shared ownership of the entire product team or the service team that has helped build the product. It is not a deliverable as for me. If I treat it as a deliverable, it has always taken feedback. So I go into organization with the mindset that documentation also is equivalent product. And also we cannot measure documentation by page count. We have to measure it by user success. And we'll talk about that further. So these are the reasons why I think documentation fails. Now, documentation writing is not the difficult part. It is decision making. In almost every organization that I work with, documentation was failing because documentation was not failing because people didn't, write good documents. It failed because writers were expected to create clarity from incomplete information, undocumented decisions, or constantly changing requirements, inaccessible systems, multiple reviewers, let's say unrealistic timelines. These are the reasons that, documentation fails, but we still, help make it come out accurate. So what I do to reduce the documentation risk. Now, this is something that you might want to take some notes on, but I think we'll be sharing some reference with you, some documentation with you. This is what I do. I've created a checklist, and this have helped me in my last organization. I worked with Intuit and a couple of other product companies in the last few years. This really helped me. So this is what I create, who my audience is, and I write this part as well in the Excel sheet, and whoever create the demand of documentation, I put this sheet across them, and this is a shareable sheet that I create, and everyone has to answer these questions, who the audience is, because that will determine the depth, tone, and art structure. If that part is left unanswered, if this question is left unanswered, the risk involved is it is technically accurate, but it might be unusable. We all understand that. So who is the audience is the first question. The second question is, what decision does this document help make? For example, if I'm creating a feature document, what is this feature used for? Where in the business landscape or architecture is this feature used? So our focus has to be the outcome of that feature, not the feature itself. So that's how we start the documentation. So we need these couple of liners, sentences, subjective it could be, as to what decision this document will help make. If this question is left unanswered, the risk is it becomes information instead of a guide. Now, who owns technical approval? Because we need different kinds of approval when the documentation is created. Who owns the technical approval and who owns the business approval? Because this technical approval will ensure technical accuracy, and business approval will ensure the intended business outcome. These things definitely help the way somebody shapes a document. Because if there is a business approval required in the documentation and it is towards the end of documentation, let's say just while we're about to publish the document, if any changes come, then that changes the scope of the documentation. That changes a lot of things in documentation. I'm sure we all have struggled with, last minute changes in the document, which changes the tone, depth, a lot of things within the documentation. The next question I ask is documentation in the project timeline, or is it outside the project timeline? That helps estimate the writing or the review effort. Accordingly, we can create the writing and review effort. I have a checklist for that as well. I'll share that with you in the upcoming slides. Now, this becomes release day activity if it is unanswered. If we don't answer whether the documentation is in the project timeline, you know, around the release days, around the release week, it becomes a hassle. Next question we have to put across is, do I have the access to the product? That is a very important question because we can't really just start writing something from what we hear or what we see or what we read. We have to actually, you know, create anonymous, we have to create an account for ourselves and, we need to have hands on the product for whatever documentation we're writing. So hands-on experience is very important. That's why you need access to the product. This allows validating your workflows, the screenshots we use, and if it is, not there, then of course there are a lot of assumptions and there could be a lot of errors. What artifacts already exist is another question. Artifacts do exist. Usually, when a technical writer joins an organization, it could be any kind of artifact, and we'll talk about them. So that helps in a lot of ways. So we need to understand if we have artifacts. If we do, then within the sheet itself, you can create another column and maybe place all the documentation that is available in that sheet so that you don't have to look through it later whenever you require it. How will users get help beyond this doc? So we need to write these kind of references within the doc. This has helped me a lot in larger organizations, that okay, we have a documentation for this feature or for this product or for this service, but there are other documents, other FAQs, other troubleshooting method, or other reference documents available. If we include such references within the document, it always helps. So this is my first checklist. We have other checklists that has helped me create some successful documentations in my career. Now, let's talk about 5 kinds of hidden work. A hidden work that I had seen is, discovery of all the documents. This slide is sort of a map for the rest of the talk. This is not sentence level writing. So, everything that happens within technical writing kind of happens before, around, and underneath these 5 hidden work. Discovery is when we're learning the business landscape before trying to document the feature. So as a technical writer, the times I have failed, the times I have not created good documentation was when I jumped too quickly in the technical details of the product that I need to write. What helped me later in my career when I experienced some failures was that I need to first understand the business landscape, and I really push for it. That let me get an understanding of the business landscape before I try to document the feature. Second is validating any kind of feedback loops. The checklist that I've created, and there are a couple of other checklists that I've created for you, those checklists will help you reduce the number of feedback loops that technical writers usually get into. Because we have multiple people reviewing the documentation, sometimes from different departments, and there are disagreements within that feedback loop. So how to reduce that kind of friction? We'll talk about that. Then another hidden work is engineering alignment. We all have been there, done that. So this is where we need to understand who knows own knowledge when no single team has a full picture. So there's obviously somebody, there are always a couple of people who have a bird's eye view of the product. Those are our first point of contact because they will help us understand the business landscape, the product landscape, and then we can go for a deeper dive. So we need an alignment there before we take a deeper dive. Then we have knowledge centralization. Obviously, we need fragmented information to be kept in a trusted source, into a trusted source repository that is accessible by everyone in the organization, that has searchable, that has a feature to search for documentation. I mean, our documentation has to be searchable, readable. It's most important, right? And for it to be searchable, it needs to be into a centralized repository. So knowledge centralization is a very important part of our documentation. And the final part is obviously, if all the documentation that we have created, how much of it would be published, how much of it is accurate, coming to the final lines of publishing it. So these are some of the hidden work that I've come across. Now let's talk about discovery. There's a first section. We'll quickly go through some slides here, some situations we walk into, and then I'll take you to the slide of the checklist. Now, in the discovery part, what I've seen is, we need, like we said, we need to identify the audience first. And we need to identify the best communicator in the whole product, service line, or the application line, not just the feature owner. So sometimes the team lead could be your trusted source. Sometimes even somebody from the QA team could be your trusted source. Sometimes the product manager could be your trusted source. Sometimes it could be anyone. Like, we all find different people in different organizations. I mean, at least so I have, but we need to find the best communicator. And whoever is the topmost authority or approver needs to know that this would be our point of contact to understand the product, because they are able to communicate things about the product that technical writer needs to understand, at least at the beginning, when we are not very well versed with the technical aspects or the tech stack of the product. The situation that most of us walk into is we receive, sometimes there is a process and we receive a Jira ticket for documentation. Sometimes when we join an organization, we just get a demo. We might get a list of release notes, and we're just told to document the feature. So, as a content writer, as a technical writer, as a communicator, whenever we do get these questions, we start filling knowledge gaps instead of coming to a solution. So, this is where we need to own up the documentation and teach collaboration to people in while we are also learning the document. Because I've also struggled with this fact that at least 10 years from 10 years ago from today, people were struggling with understanding the importance of documentation in the product line. Larger organizations had already realized it, but for small businesses or medium-sized businesses, it was still something that I had to force my way into, because there were such tight timelines to publish the product or application on time that documentation used to take lesser priority than other tasks. So, when we join during the first release, good. We get some time to publish good documents. Sometimes we join a technical writer team or as an individual contributor after years of product evolution, or while the product is one of the product is sunsetting, there is an upgrade in the product. So we all have, joined different times of a product line. But we are immediately expected to start understanding and writing the documentation. So this is where the real challenge is. And this is what we need to learn, how organizations think about the technology. And I have realized that if I am serious about the documentation success, then I need to create these checklists and make everybody understand it visibly, have them look at what the vision I have for documentation. And that is when it's a collaboration. And that's when, ownership starts flowing into the documentation. So we need to really create that vision for everybody to see when we join an organization that, okay, if we want a successful documentation, this is my checklist. I need these answers. And unless I don't have these answers, I will not be able to move forward. So these are the things that we need to understand, that assumptions are not something we need to jump into. So first challenge is not asking better questions, it's discovering what questions do even exist. Sometimes we just randomly ask questions, but we don't even understand what are the types of questions we need to ask for this. For example, which product owns this feature? Let's say we just get a feature and it's part of a different product, part of a product, but it is very down in the line of the feature that we have to write a documentation for. It's very down in the line. We need to get about the review, a closer look and top level look, top to bottom look at the feature of the product itself. Are we into some kind of versioning in the product? Is the feature being replaced? Which region is still using it? What makes implementation, who is making implementation decisions? Who owns customers versus internal documentation? Is this for engineers, customer support, or future teams? So these are different kind of questions applicable to different kind of organizations and different kind of technical writers. But if you're unfamiliar with the product, what I'm trying to tell you here is do not ask technical questions. Try to understand the landscape and put questions like that. Our discovery will have layers. So I would request everyone to always dive into the business discovery of the product first, then the product discovery, then technical, and then the documentation discovery. So we cannot jump directly into the technical part of it. We need to understand the business landscape. Where does the product lie in that business landscape? What does it do? Who owns the feature? And all those questions that will come in the checklist. Then the technical part of the product, and then what is the documentation we have available. If we go like this, then that's the distinction I want you to leave with. Discovery is not one step. It is 4 steps. And if you skip the first 3, that is where most of the documentation problems start. What is the actual audience for this document is a very important question. Ask before the outline exists. An important question. Ask before the outline exists. So of the difference between documentation people appreciate and documentation people ignore. That's where the outline exists. Sometimes we get documentation that, oh, it's for system administrators. Later in the review process, somebody comes in and tells us that, oh, this is far too technical for our clients. So we need to change the tone and the depth, in fact, even the grammar, everything. So we were not writing the wrong documentation. You've always been writing the right documentation, but for the wrong audience. That's why we need to ask the right questions. This is an organization archaeology that I've created. I've joined a product in the final stages of a multi-year product transformation. Legacy features were sunsetting while replacements were rolled out region by region. There wasn't one source of truth. There were several partial truths. I spent almost 2 weeks before writing a single page. I wasn't writing, I was just validating information because it was available everywhere. So you need to understand where the documentation is. Is it SharePoint? Which, because a lot of organizations have documentation available in different parts. Some of it is available in Teams chats or Slack chats. Some of it is available in wiki documents. Some of it is available with pre-sales team, the PPT roadmaps, some old release notes. So you need to collect all of this, but not just start working on it. Just collect all of this, and this also becomes a part of the checklist that I shared at the beginning. Now, connecting perspectives, we're not just collecting them. We have to connect the perspectives of different teams. The engineering team will tell you about the technical reality. The product team will tell you about the vision that the product has. If there is a support team, then we have to understand that there is a client visibility of the documentation. So we need to keep that factor in documentation. And if there is a program team, engagement team, then there are timelines as well. So everyone has correct, but not complete picture. So as a technical writer, this is our role to give a complete picture, but we also have to collect these documentation in different segments. So what I have done as a technical writer is, along with the sheet that I shared at the beginning checklist, I also create another sheet within the same sheet, and I make 4 such or 3 such columns where I write perspectives of how different teams see it. But when I speak to any person and I conduct a meeting to understand or get a demo of the product, I ask them, which stream do you belong to? Which department do you belong to? What are your visions of the product? How do you see the product? What is your understanding of why this documentation is needed and who this documentation is needed for? I write all of their perspectives so that when I'm writing the documentation or when there is a review process, we have a sheet to talk to, connect our dots to that, okay, we have the same vision. So you can always do that. It has always helped me. Now we come to second section, which is feedback loops, because once we've collected documentation, once we have collected all the information from different departments, the feedback start. But before the feedback start, there is an important thing that we need to discuss, which is we need to validate information with SMEs instead of treating it as a review problem. That is why we need to assign review ownership before we request reviews. Who has the final approval? The document does not improve because writing changed. It improves because ownership becomes visible. That's the only way to have a successful documentation. Create, build a documentation that is visible with visible ownership. Which team owns which documentation. If the document sits untouched while reviewer assumes someone else will respond, that has created a lot of feedback gaps. So there is always an approver name that every documentation needs to have. You can remove those approver names towards the end when you're publishing the document, but when you write a document, there should always be an approver section in the document, maybe towards the beginning or maybe towards the end, but you have to have it. Next is documentation feedback loops. We talk about different teams, defining what each reviewer is responsible for before the reviews even start. So by that, you are reducing a lot of documentation risk. Again, documentation does not need more reviews. It just needs right reviews. We all know that. Engineering team will give us technical accuracy. Leadership team will give us the strategic alignment of the product. How do they see the product? What needs to resolve? And it's not always easy to just, barge into leadership team and ask them for their strategic alignment. So we need to go step by step, but it all needs to be in our checklist of reviewers that we need to have some kind of communication from them to understand what and how will we get the right reviews and from whom. So instead of can you review the document, what I do is when I send my documents for reviews, I ask them specific questions. So if I send it to technical team, I'll ask them, can you verify the workflow accuracy, if it reflects the implementation correctly or not? If I send it to engagement team or the marketing team, I'll ask them, can you confirm this explanation is appropriate for our customer audience? So you need to ask the right questions to get the right reviews. And that is why when I create documentation, I always enter sections for different reviewers that, okay, from marketing team, this person, from technical team, this person, for the feature accuracy, I will get the review from this person. And if there is engagement team, customer facing team, leadership team, then we can write their names to get the final understanding from them. But you need to ask right questions that, okay, as a feature owner, you need to give me reviews on the accuracy of this document. I give you a sheet for that. You can use this section in your verification sheet or your checklist that you create at the beginning of the document. That if the feedback is wrong, then there is a high priority for that. If, for example, I create a documentation, a step is wrong, it is high priority, I need to change it. But if there is a wording preference, somebody does not like the way you are writing it, there is a grammar conflict, there is a intent conflict, then that takes a lower priority. So you can write this in your review sheet within the document. If I have made a wrong, if I've made a mistake in writing the wrong step, the priority is high and I will definitely make the change right now. But, or if it's a missing feature, if the screenshot is wrong, for sure the priority goes high and we change it right away. But if it's grammar or wording preference, then it takes a lower priority. Not that it won't be considered, but yes, it takes a lower priority. So always work on the higher priority reviews and feedbacks. That helps a lot of friction to be reduced, because when somebody looks at a document and they see that they need to only review it for technical accuracy, then they will not comment on the grammar or the wording preference. And if they do, then you can always tell them that for the grammar and wording preference, I take your feedback But I will first work on the technical accuracy and then we will look into this. So you can always give good weightage to the reviews, but understand the priority. Next is engineering alignment. What I do with engineering team is they get the documentation demo, but I always ask for something which is very important, which is access of the document. I have had specifications told, demos, but that does not give the whole story. I'm sure it happens with everyone that, we need to have a hands-on experience on the products to write the whole story. Real understanding comes from clicking through the product, right? Making mistakes. So that's why we need to, do a hands-on of the entire workflow so that the documentation comes out accurate. Okay. There's another thing after hands-on that I do is I ask, along with demos, I always ask the QA team to walk me through their test scenarios. If they have test cases, that has really helped me because not because I wanted to understand the testing part, but because most of the useful FAQs comes out of test cases, not from the feature or demos that the engineering team gives. So you can always ask them what are the validation rules for whatever feature it is. Are there any error messages? If there are any error messages, what are the resolutions for that? What are the prerequisites for it? Common user mistakes, recovery paths, and different troubleshooting scenarios. This will always help you. So connect with the QA team, ask them to tell you the best cases. If they have it documented, that's the best part. If you don't understand it, arrange a meeting and talk about test cases. And it always helps understand the product from a customer point of view. So you see, what happens with engineering alignment is usually, I've seen in a lot of product teams, that documentation is considered very late in the product. You have requirements, they create all these sprints around developments and testing and, put it into production, UAT environment. But it is when the product goes into UAT, pre-fraud, that's when the documentation comes in. And that's how documentation becomes long. However, the documentation needs to start with the development. Because if you see, we notice something here, documentation is not longer, it just starts earlier. If it starts earlier, everything is planned and, most effective changes a documentation team can make is consider it as a part of release planning. Not because it needs more time, but documentation has its own life cycle. Please remember that. Always repeat this line to the engineering team that documentation has its own life cycle. And next is knowledge centralization. How do we reconcile fragmented information into a trusted source? We need to create a playbook that people, can refer. So what I did was I stopped asking where the documentation is. I didn't search for document. I didn't copy whatever existing content they have. I didn't document the software right away. Again, I started asking questions and noting down the answers to them that who wants this decision? Who are the decision makers of this product? Why, if there is any content that already exists, why does it exist? And validating it with the decision makers that whether this documentation, the one that exists, is the latest one, is it still applicable? Can I pick something out of this, or is it outdated? So we keep existing documentation in different columns. When you create that checklist, you always keep your documentation repository also separated in different columns if it is updated or the outdated ones. And then we also document business decisions, which is what are they going to do with the documents that already do exist? Are they going to be part of the knowledge centralization? Are they going to stay somewhere, in some wiki or some SharePoint location where, people can refer to them, but they are not the only source of truth? So, you have to ask these questions. So what I do is when I create the documentation, I create this index in the documentation. I remove it gradually, eventually, when I have to publish it. But until unless I don't get the final approval, these sections will always exist in the documentation. It has really helped me. The objective has to mention, why the documentation exists, and how do we prevent the feature dumps from without purpose. We have to have audience intake, which is, that if there is any information which is missing before writing, is there are any intake, who are the SMEs, who are the approvers of this document, what are the timelines that we're looking at, if there is any glossaries, there is any shared language, there are any jargons within the organization, what does it mean? Different references can have your existing documentation, Teams, Slack chats, links, anything, all the documentation references, and then appendix that keeps your material, supporting material accessible. So it does not, clutter your main documentation. Try to have a playbook that has all these sections, and it will really help you get good feedbacks. That's a completely different message than standardize the writing. Instead of walking through the whole playbook, just play out why each section exists. And people will remember, okay, we have SMEs within the documentation because this technical writer needs different kind of reviews from different person. There are timelines mentioned here, so yes, we know the phase this documentation is in right now, and by when can we expect a review or the final publishing. There is a glossary, so that if there are different teams that we are talking to, they do not give us different definitions of the same technology or terminology. So this playbook really helps. You can always use this in your document. And when you are looking at publishing a document, please look at what accurate enough what is accurate enough to publish. So what you can do is, until create a checklist for your review, which is, can user actually find it? You have to ask this yourself, and you have to ask this to the people responsible for getting the document published. Can users find it? Can you skim it? Can they scan it? Like, is this searchable? Can they complete the task for which this documentation is created? Or do they come back to the teams that they can have a verbal conversation with, or is the documentation enough for them? These are the measures for the success of your documentation. If they can find it, if they can complete the task through the documentation, then you have created a good documentation. Not how many people have viewed it, not how many pages have you completed, but can they find it, skim it, and complete the task? If they do come back, what kind of documentation? If they do come back to the documentation again and again to complete the task, then your documentation has built trust. And you need to measure your document, not measure the friction. So always look at the better metrics. Your better metrics to understand if your documentation is a success is the feature it covers, the feature documentation coverage. Is it covering the entire feature or not? Is there good visibility of the feature from the product? Completion rate, how much of the task have I completed? How many features have I completed? How many documentations of different features have I completed? What is the first success rate? Are people within the organization or outside the organization able to first it? How much time did I take to publish it? And if there is any ticket resolution team available, then what is the rate for supported ticket reduction? So these are your better metrics. Do not measure if it's word count or page views, or how many writers do we have, but the better metric. So also please understand that after so many documentations are created, I was expected to know the product entirely, which is never true. As a technical writer, we're always learning the product. Documentation is often the process through which an expertise develops. So every release will have new terminology, new technology, our tech stack keeps increasing. We have new questions, new customers. So experienced writers are not the one who knows everything. They're the ones who know how to keep learning. So you have to tell it to yourself. Do not be under this misconception that as a technical writer, I need to know the entire product. No, there's no single framework that works here. Like I was talking about, different types of writers have different kinds of source of truth who would spin off their document. what are the standards followed, what done means for different teams, different kind of writers, and what are their different issues. So as a SaaS writer, as a product writer for SaaS products, I've had different sources of truth for me. For a medical device writer, there are different kinds of sources of truth. And as a manufacturing writer, somebody from aeronautics or from, hardware industry, they have different kinds of framework for them. So, but the hidden work behind all of them is the same. The playbooks that I've created, the checklists that I've created are applicable to all kinds of writers. So you can always come back to the sheet and maybe create a framework for yourself and walk through these sections so that your feedback loops, your discovery questions, your what your playback looks like, your knowledge centralization, all of it is in place. I mean, this framework is kind of universal. It's just that the answers to them are different for different kind of writers. Now, documentation scales as an ecosystem, not a hero effort. So please keep telling that yourself. Feature documentation will tell you how the product works. It will not tell you the entire organization knowledge, but reference guides will tell you the organization knowledge. Support articles will give you FAQs, recurring questions. Small, if you create, bit-sized videos, bite-sized videos, they will give you common workflows. If you look at the marketing content, it will always give you new capabilities. What are the high level features of the product? Internal documentations will help engineering teams, different teams. So, whatever documentation you're creating will have a purpose, will have an audience. It does not scale because, good documentation does not scale because writers work harder. It scales because organizations stop expecting documentation to solve every problem alone. So different documents will solve different problems. So keep that very clear to yourself and to other teams that this is a feature document, so this will only tell you how the product works. It will not give you a whole picture of the organization. Now, the hidden work is the job, right? Discovery, feedback, alignment, centralization, knowing when it is done. None of it is shown up in your word count. All of it shows up in the document is actually working and people are actually reading through it.
Thank you, Khyati. And that's a wrap for today's session. And of course, if you have more questions or wanted to learn more about Document 360, then feel free to reach out to us. We'll be back soon with another session. Until then, see you next time.